Hello, welcome to Little Literati, and this is my top 10 video for the year 2017. Now, a couple of qualifications. These are books that I read for the very first time last year. I'm not counting rereads, and these books didn't necessarily come out in 2017. Some of them did, but that's not one of my criteria. So let's just go ahead and get started. These are the top 10 books that I read for the very first time in 2017. I'm going to go in order by size. And so this first one is A Court of Wings and Ruin by Sarah J. Maas. It's the third book in the Court of Thorns and Roses series. And I really enjoyed this. I like how everything wrapped up. I didn't love it maybe quite as much as I liked A Court of Mist and Fury, but it was still very, very excellent. I read this and I started crying. There's one part I just started crying uncontrollably. And I told my friend about it, and who I also got her converted to the series. And so then she was reading a couple of months later, and she's like, "Was this the part that you were crying at?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "Yeah, I started crying at that same part." So I'm not going to spoil anything, but I'll just say that there's a family relationship in here that made me cry. Happy tears. So there was that one. This is The Language of Thorns. This is my Fairy Loot exclusive cover with the red lettering. And I really, really enjoyed this book. It is a collection of in-world fairy tales told by the people who live in her world, that the Grishaverse. And so obviously they're not the same fairy tales that we know, that we're familiar with, but you can definitely see some of the roots. And so it kind of helps perpetuate the idea that no matter what world you're from or what culture you're from, there are some underlying themes that are kind of universal. So that was just kind of fun. But these are really pretty dark, and yet I loved them because I really like dark fairy tales. So this was just really definitely up my alley and scratched the itch that I didn't even know I had. And I love in-world fairy tales. Those are just fun because it's very meta. This is Roseblood. This one did come out in 2017. Actually, so did Actually, so far all of these have. But so this was Roseblood by A.G. Howard. And this is inspired by The Phantom of the Opera, which is one of my favorite classics. And it's not exactly a retelling. It's a contemporary story, but there are definitely some nods and history involved with the original story, so it's a lot of fun. And I also loved that the words inside this copy are colored red, and so I'm hoping that the paperback, which is coming out very soon, will also have the red words. Because so far all of the books that I have by her do. Alright, this next one also came out in 2017. This is Daughter of the Pirate King, which I received from, I want to say, Owlcrate. And I also received Roseblood from Owlcrate. So this one is by Tricia Levenseller. And this one was really a lot of fun. It was quirky. There was a 17-year-old female pirate captain. And it was just really a lot of fun to read because she is no nonsense and takes no prisoners. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what other adventures she comes out with. So this was Daughter of the Pirate King. This was The Star-Touched Queen by Roshani Chokshi. And I read this and absolutely fell in love with it. The writing is very lush, very gorgeous. The story is kind of a darker mythological story, and yet there were parts of it that felt so familiar. Again, going back to what I was mentioning earlier about underlying universal themes of humanity, some parts of this felt very familiar, even though I mostly got raised on Western mythology instead of Eastern. This was very, very beautiful, and I also loved the sequel, A Crown of Wishes, but I was trying really hard to not duplicate authors. You'll see a little bit later I did cover book once, but I figure 2 books in the same series, I probably shouldn't go there, but I really, really loved The Star-Touched Queen. This was My Lady Jane by Cynthia Hand, Brody Ashton, and Jody Meadows. And this is laugh out loud funny. I read through this, and you wouldn't think that the story of Lady Jane Grey would be funny, but they managed to come up with an alternate history that is really a lot of fun. And there's magic involved, and there's shape-shifting, and a lot of tongue-in-cheek humor, and it was just really a lot of fun. So I loved this, and I was so excited when it came out paperback and I could get my hands on my very own copy. This is Ash and Bramble by Sarah Perneus, and this kind of turns the story, the fairy tale of Cinderella, on its head. So the fairy godmother is not as benevolent as she appears in most of our ideas of the fairy tale. And this is also kind of behind the scenes of who actually makes the dresses that all these princesses go to the balls in? Who makes the shoes that are so important to so many of the other fairy tales? The shoemaker and the elves, the glass slipper. Who does all of the behind the scenes work to make the magic happen? And so this one was really fun. It made me think, and that was what really stuck out to me, was that it made me think about the idea of fairy tales and the power that they hold, and just, is that necessarily a good power, or is it a cog in a bigger wheel, which is how it ends up being in this book. So I really enjoyed this, made me think, and I was glad that I got to buy it. This is Daughter of Smoke and Bone by Laini Taylor, and I hadn't read anything by Laini Taylor before the beginning of this year, and then I read most of the books that she has out, and I loved all of them. So I was really, really good, and only picked out 2 by her for this list, and they are from different series, but I decided I couldn't monopolize half of my list with just Laini Taylor, so I was really good and just tried to winnow it down. This is the first book in the Daughter of Smoke and Bone series, and featuring Carew as the main character, and so this really explores what would happen if angels and demons were actually denizens of another world that's parallel to ours, and what would happen if they came to our world, and it explores the relationships between the different races and different species, and can we live in peace and in tolerance with people who are not like we are. And so it was a very interesting look at our reactions to the other, whatever that other may be, even in our own society. And she didn't lay all that explicitly out there, but there was a lot of really good story, and the story itself was just awesome, and it was just a hugely epic story, and the whole trilogy just was this overarching fantastic story that was so rich, and I felt like I was there, and the language was beautiful, and I just absolutely loved this series. And I got the UK edition, which I know I mentioned in a previous video, because the American version creeped me out. So this is my beautiful UK version. Another book that I got by her, that I was trying to find another book that I liked, but I just couldn't pass this one up because I loved it too much. This is Lips Touch, also by Laini Taylor. It is not attached to any of her other series. It's a standalone little book of 3 little short stories that are not exactly fairy tale retellings, and they're not exactly original either. They're kind of a beautiful melding of the two. And so there are a lot of similar themes that we're very familiar with in our own fairy tales and mythology and poetry and literature. And then she just kind of wove all of these pieces that we're very familiar with into something that was new and exciting. And I read this on my phone at first, and I flew through it. It was amazingly beautiful. And the stories, like I said, they felt so familiar, and yet they were new and beautiful and fresh. And I just really, really loved it. And again, this is the UK version because it matched my other books that I got from her. This last book is Written in Red by Anne Bishop, which I know I've mentioned in several videos this year. But I read this for the very first time this year and loved it. And I read the entire series really quickly, back to back. And then a couple of months later, I read the entire series again, back to back, because I loved it so much. So I think that's a pretty good indication of whether or not you really like a book in a series, if you're willing to reread it, the entire series, twice in a single year. That's actually a new thing for me. I don't think I've ever done that before, but it was very fun, and I loved this book so much, and I'm not going to belabor the point too much because I know I talked about it in my first wrap-up video that I ever did for this series. I just rambled on and on about how much I loved it and how wonderful it was. But it's very fun, and there's innocence, and yet there's darkness, and it's not a safe world. And the others, again, similar to the Daughter of Smoke and Bone, there was a lot of our relationship with the other explored in this series. And in fact, there are a subset of people called the Others, and they are shapeshifters and werewolves and vampires and other, what we would conceive of as monsters. And yet we see from their point of view that to them we are the monsters. And so there's a lot of innocence and innocence lost, and there's darkness, but there's also kind of a message of hope and of peace kind of threaded through everything. And it just is, there was a lot of fun humor in here, and I just really loved this whole series. So, loved it. So those are the 10 books that I loved in 2017. My goal for 2018 is to once again read 100 books at least, and I am hoping that I can get a good jump on that. There are some books that I'm really looking forward to this year, and several of them are sequels to books that I have here, actually. So I'm really looking forward to the sequel of Daughter of the Pirate King, which is called Daughter of the Siren Queen, which is coming out, I want to say, in February. And I'm really looking forward to the sequel, not exactly a sequel, but it's in the same line of the Lady Janie's books. So these same authors are coming out this year with a book called My Plain Jane, which is going to turn the idea of Charlotte Bronte and Jane Eyre on its head, and I'm really looking forward to that. So I think that one comes out maybe, it's in late spring, early summer, I think. I think it might be May or June. I forgot to look it up, but anyway, so I'm really looking forward to My Plain Jane. I'm hoping it's going to be fantastic because I love this one so much. I'm hoping that I love the other book in the series. So that's 2 of them. I'm looking forward to, it's not exactly a sequel, it's a novella that takes place after A Court of Wings and Ruins called A Court of Frost and Starlight. So it's only going to be a couple of 100 pages, but we're going to revisit Rhys and Feyre. And then it's going to tie this trilogy into the next trilogy that takes place in the same world, but doesn't have the same narrator. So Feyre and Rhys aren't going to be in the next trilogy, but they are going to be in this next novella that bridges the 2. So I'm really looking forward to that. That comes out in May. For another 5 that I was really looking forward to. I'm really looking forward to, but I'm also apprehensive. I'm anticipating, but I'm really apprehensive of the next book in this world. It's not a continuation. We're not really going to focus on Meg and the courtyard at Lakeside, which is what I really, really loved about this series. The next book is called Lake Silence, and it takes place in a different part of the same world. But from the description, it doesn't sound like it's going to be as much fun as this one was. So I'm a little bit nervous, but I'm also really looking forward to it because I've loved this world so much. So we'll see, fingers crossed. The 5th book that I'm really looking forward to isn't a sequel of one of these, but it is a sequel. It is called Kiss of the Spindle by Nancy Campbell Allen. It's a sequel to Beauty and the Clockwork Beast, and that comes out in July. And so that one is a steampunk romance version of Sleeping Beauty. So I'm really looking forward to that. I'm hoping that'll be really, really good because I love Beauty and the Clockwork Beast. But I did read it this year, but I'd read it the year before, so I didn't include it in here. In fact, I included it in my last year's video. So those are at least 5 books that I'm really looking forward to coming out. I'm sure there are going to be so many others that I'll really, really love. So stay tuned, stay with me for this year, and I'm hoping that we can have a really great adventure. So down in the comments below, let me know what you read that stuck out to you in the year 2017. What were on your top 10, 5, however many you read. What were your very, very favorites, and let me know what you're looking forward to reading this coming year, 2018. And we will see you in the next video. Happy New Year!